Okay, so I'm going to watch a some movie from 2019, which is just last year. I usually watch older movies, but I of course primarily watch random movies, not just old or new. I cannot watch futuristic music. No, as in movies set in the future, not. Well, yeah, there are movies about futurism, but that's not the point. Futurism is an artistic movie. Anyway, yeah, so I have no idea what this is about as usual. Could be about absolutely anything as far as I know. It is called Holiday Hell, and yeah, it could be about absolutely everything or nothing, or could be about heaven for all I know. I mean, titles don't necessarily represent anything, do they? Could be about people committing suicide, because that is what I'm accustomed to, and whenever I watch anything with hell in the title, usually Japanese, it's usually, there were several authors who committed suicide after writing about the concept of hell. Although, of course, hell in Buddhism is a slightly different concept. Uh, anyway, yeah. So this is categorized as a horror film. Supposedly, it appears to be about people. Of course, that's usually where most of the horror comes from. And, so yesterday, I watched, that one about corrupt cops, and I mean that's pretty horrifying itself. It would be even more horrifying if it was a real story. I don't think it was, but there are plenty of real stories about that. So now we go into the more fictional horror type. I mean, could be fictional, could not be. I've watched plenty of horror that is based on real life as well, so it's not entirely fictional. I'm assuming it is fictional. Usually it is fictional. Yeah. Anyway, let's begin this and see what it's like. And yeah, with just like with any movie I've never heard of, usually there are no actors I've heard of either. There is one though. It seems to be Christmas themed or something, but also knife themed or something. And the color red features quite heavily. There are hammers as well and other tools for some reason. Anyway, there is also someone with a surname of Vigil. So I suppose I thought it's kind of appropriate, I suppose, I don't know, based on whatever they're doing here. Edited by Jeff Vigil. Yeah, I guess when Jeff Vigil dies, he has a vigil himself before he is either buried or cremated. Yeah. And also his partner apparently is David Burns. So they burn and then they hold a vigil. And I just realized haunted goods, which is a term that is, I suppose, well, it could be a term used for, well, mainly advertising purposes, I suppose, but it's really a misnomer, isn't it? I mean, if something is haunted, cannot be a good. Obviously, goods are usually used for items generally, but there is no such thing as haunted beds. It makes no sense. There's nothing that is said to be bad as a noun. So yeah. Anyway, I also notice statues of animals. Which is peculiar, I guess, that it's inherently considered to be a horror item. I guess it represents a sort of afterlife, but after watching the whole Psycho franchise, it really reminds me of that one aspect, of course. So I just heard this strange sentence that objects have a story, and yet that story has never been told. If it's never been told, how do you know the story? Then just makes a little sense. But anyway, at one point, someone seemed to imply that Mascara gave her the courage to text. Seemingly, you would think, maybe if people are given courage, it would be at the very least, a face-to-face encounter. I mean, that would make sense, wouldn't it? Considering, what the definition of mascara is. But yeah, never mind. At one point, someone says that God created iPhones. If so, does that make Steve Jobs God? And if so, God is dead, right? Unfortunate, but that's really where investment should be in such medical research. To note, why do some movies seem to think that blood is simply as fluid as water, except red? Just it's not though, is it? It's slightly more solid, slightly, not as much as putty or anything. No. But anyway, I just realized these sort of random slashers might even be less valuable, less creative, if that is possible. I mean, most slashers aren't really, Psycho could be considered a slasher, but it really has very little in comparison. Yeah. But these could be even less creative than like Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's saying something. At least Freddy Krueger had some character. He did. I mean, Jason Voorhees had a backstory. These characters really have virtually none. Alright, I admit it has some interesting dark humor. Someone calling someone else from behind, just the hair, a doll face. How can anyone call the back of the head doll face? It's not even a face. And tell me the name of your teddy bear is just weirdly funny. But seriously, the amount of violence is unbelievable. I mean, it's not even hit the 20-minute mark yet, and there's been more murders than Psycho probably had in about 2 films. Yeah. And yeah, I get that each story at least finishes relatively quickly. Based on this, it seems like there might be around 6 or so, or 5 stories, if everyone is 20 minutes. So the second one is from Jewish Holiday, but I cannot quite figure out what the first one is about unless some sort of unless it's a holiday for sex in a haunted house. Who knows? And yeah, for the second tale, a new take on Kevin McAllister's shenanigans. with the inclusion of a doll. It's quite an interesting doll too. Doesn't say much, but the expressions tell all. So I'm wondering, there's a medical model thing, another doll, if you will, but it's a model really. Yeah, I cannot fathom what holiday that would be in. I mean, unless there's some sort of bodily holiday. That reminds me of Pin, which I've recently watched. It's not quite the most exciting movie, but apparently it's got some sort of cultish following. But yeah, anyway. Okay, so at the 43rd minute mark, there's a painting that looks quite interesting. It's quite simple, but somehow has a sort of trick to it, I suppose. The bottom is blank, it's just white, whereas the background at the top is brown, and that covers the upper tree, all the leaves, and it's quite it's a red tree for some reason, but the bottom is white, and there's only the stem, just stem at the bottom. In fact, the leaves do not touch the bottom at all for some reason. So it's I don't know if that makes it look sort of 3D almost, because it sort of looks like the trees coming out of the picture just because it's been separated like that. I'm not sure if that's sort of the effect that 3D usually goes for to try to achieve such an illusion. In the third tale, we're back to, well, plain humor in this case. It's not even mostly dark humor, it's just plain humor. But it's quite funny. I had never actually heard of what a ho-ho dessert was, although when looking at it, it's familiar, and yet it's just it was quite funny how yeah how someone can go for that more than advocate for their promotion. Well, of course they would, but anyway, the way it was delivered was funny. Also, I like the snowman themed pillowcases. I do generally like though how they recycle through different environments and stories. So you know that the whole 1 hour 40 minutes isn't just about drunken teenagers or something. That's just the first 20 minutes, and then it's about some child with a doll, and then it's about a corporation. Well, I'm kind of looking forward to what's next, I suppose, whatever it is. But I'm not sure why this seemingly is trying to imply that antibiotics can be used recreationally. This makes a little sense, really. Not sure how they react with alcohol, but I really doubt they can. I also like how in the third tale they mix some piano, jazz, and an intense background sort of tune. Alright, so the third tale finished, and it's kind of weird how that the shop customer from the beginning that we go to after every tale suddenly, just now, for the first time, I think, looks grim. After the first tale, she was smiling for some reason. I'm not sure if she thinks somehow that the teenagers aren't supposed to just seems to have some sort of different value system for different people or something. And of course, out in the country, they chant. Of course, that's the stereotype, right? It's the country horror, if you will. And also, who introduces themselves to someone they've never met before with a smirk. I mean, that's not exactly very sensible, is it? I mean, this is clearly something weird, right? With the smirk. I'm not entirely sure a smirk is appropriate for many cases, really, except for any sort of smug perceptions of. Generally, if they deny what is obvious to one's senses, then they could very easily be a part of the problem, I suppose. So, yeah, I've finished it, and the last couple of stories were kind of repetitive, naturally, although at least they introduced a pagan element to where Christmas originated from, so anyway, the only really remotely positive thing about this is the fact that, well, most Christmas films are so repetitive themselves and so unnecessarily positive usually. Way too much. They're like piles of sugar, really, just unnecessary sugar. When just a bit would be just fine. I mean, there are some that aren't completely over the top, but most are. So, yeah, and this turns on its head a bit. There is quite a lot of, well, so yeah, some references, I suppose, to mainly Christmas. Other than that, I suppose the second one was really my preferred version of this holiday hell, because it was different from the rest. But really, the main problem is that most villains didn't even have backstories, man, just didn't. They did at least have some Paganini, Violent Concerto No. 2, Final Movement. That was a nice touch. I'm assuming that's public domain. Other than that, the music was fine. And I usually like the music. Some of it was eerie, some was jazzy. The narratives themselves, though, I mean, even the third tale, for example, went a bit too much. I mean, so it's meant to imply that um, antibiotics would induce some murderous state. I mean, makes very little sense, unless, of course, it's banking on the hope that people have no idea that it is an antibiotic, and I suppose they could not. It's not very familiar, and most people, I guess, wouldn't research it. But really, once one knows, I mean, it makes very little sense. I mean, an antibiotic of all things. There was alcohol, I suppose, but seemingly the antibiotic was some sort of, well, most of them though make little sense. There is some interesting dark humor, but most of it really isn't very substantive. The whole movie isn't very substantial, actually. And don't suppose this will become a classic. Oh no, it might yet. The the first tale, though, was the most stereotypical, really. The most Freddy Kruegerish, I guess one could say. The second was the most interesting. Yeah, the third was just some sort of revenge story thought up from by someone who was is frustrated at in their career. And the last couple of ones were kind of repetitive, but at least introduced a pagan element. Other than that, yeah. Well, at least it still made more sense than a single cop who is absolutely out of all control and just devastates absolutely everyone. And yeah,